my next guest tonight, joining me all the way from Manchester, United Kingdom. I'd like everybody to welcome to the show John Robb of The Membranes. How are we doing, John?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm just sat here in Manchester, typical Manchester. It's sunny and raining all at the same time.
Oh man, it's the same way here in New England. It's the same way here in New England. You know, it's raining, it's sunny, then all of a sudden it'll start snowing for an hour. It's just the way that it is.
That's why I always feel comfortable in that corner. It's interesting you go there as an English person because all the town names and all the English names, it's like a map of England that's been cut up and stuck back together in a different order. So Manchester, which is, you've got a Manchester near you, which is like a very small town. And then you'll have Boston, which in England is like a tiny little place, which is the main city around there. And it's like a parallel alternative universe. And a lot of the buildings look quite English as well because they were built by English people at the time. It's not as much as in Canada. When I go to Canada, that's, you go to Toronto, that's very English. You find a lot of Toronto looks like Manchester. It's got little red brick terraces and a lot of British place names. I mean, it's not because I like the familiarity. I'm just fascinated by the way these things stay after 300 years. There's still those little echoes, those little shivers of the past.
Oh, absolutely. We actually have a Manchester that's like 20 miles from me. There's a Belfast, Maine. I mean, we have an Egypt, we have a Rome, we have a China. Like, I think Maine, they just decided to say fuck it, and they started looking everywhere else on the map, and like, we got to fill in this area, so let's just start picking something, and we'll go with it.
Oh, well, it's kind of mixed with some Native American names, isn't it? Like Massachusetts, which is not where you are, but near to you. That's a Native American word, and it's I like that mixture. The kind of the collage of cultures.
Oh, absolutely. In Maine, it still has a very predominant tribal community on the reservations in the northern TR regions in Maine, and so there's still a lot of those areas, like Sadahoc County. Like, there's a bunch of counties in Maine that are all Native American tribal names and stuff like that. So there's a mix. There's an absolute mix of the English colonialism matched with the native tribes of the area, and that's pretty much all of New England. And you're definitely right about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like I say, I like it up there. I mean, we talked about this before, but we actually played in the Membranes. We played in Portland in 1988, so that's a long time. We'll get back there one day maybe. And I had some memories of the city, and the gig was great as well because there's always a very strong scene for British post-punk in that sort of northeast corner of the United States. So Boston was always good. We played the Rat Club a couple of times. Where else did we play? There's a couple of places there. Portland was the best town. We were on Homestead Records at the time, and all their bands would tour through Portland because the scene was really good. It's really well organised, bunch of good heads there, and just a really good gig. And I remember the gig really, really clearly after all these years.
That's awesome, especially after all these years. And Portland still continues to have an amazing, thriving punk rock scene. It's a very diverse music scene. From metal to hip hop to electronic to punk to post-punk and post-hardcore and thrash. Portland's got a little bit of everything, and it's stayed an incredibly vibrant musical city for years, which has been amazing. It's been so fortunate, when I moved from Boston back up to Maine, I was worried about just the regularity of having diversity through music. And when I had come back from college or university, I was just blown away by the acts. And then my band getting to play through there in the Northeast for years, it was a great thing to be a part of. And it's great even now to be able to go and champion so many amazing artists from all around the world.
Well, even as you get close to Boston, or the towns coming up to Boston, there's an incredible scene of bands come out of Boston over the years. And obviously with Dinosaur coming from Amherst. Amherst is not that far from you, is it?
Amherst, Mass, and probably it's like a little, like around 2.5 hours.
Yeah, that's around the corner for America.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll do that in our sleep. Like, I remember being on tour and it's like, oh, we got 9 hours till the next city. We got 14 hours till the next city. And that's just standard protocol for touring here in the United States.
Yeah, I've toured America a lot, and it's that thing. At first, you think the 9-hour drive is insanely long, And then you get really hypnotized by the long drives, and you actually, I really like them because you just sit there, especially when you go over to the west side where the cities are really far apart. And I love the desert and all the cactuses. And I like it when you go to the motorway services to fuel the van, and there's nobody there. There's not. You have to put the money in because there isn't anyone that lives around there. I remember one night we last tour we did about 3 years ago. We stopped at a motel about midnight because we'd been driving for hours. And then we woke up next morning and we thought, let's go to the nearest town for breakfast. And there was no nearest town. It was about 60 miles away, the nearest town. This is on the border of Mexico. It's an amazing place. I remember that night when we booked into the room, we walked around a bit. And there's like all these kind of weird little mammals running around, scurrying around in the cactuses in the desert. There's an incredible sunset as well. And for an English person, it really felt like you're in a different country. Because like when I go to Boston, when I go to Maine, of course, culturally there are differences, but I feel more at home there because they look like our cities more. But when you get to that side, you get to Middle, when you get to Phoenix, all those kind of cities, it's very, very different, isn't it? I like that. I like that about America. I like the way, there's a lot of people in Britain think all American cities look the same, but I can assure all the people in Britain, they're all very, very different from each other. You know, you have to understand the subtleties, really. You know, like Phoenix doesn't really have a centre. It's just a suburban sprawl that goes out into this boiling hot desert for hours. Whereas on the east side, the cities do sprawl, but they're more compressed and they're more squashed in, aren't they? So, you know, New York goes up, doesn't spread out. But on the west side, they spread, don't they? And, yeah. So my favourite on the west side was Albuquerque. That was an amazing place. That was just that was the most Mexican place I've been to, and I've been to Mexico because we played Mexico City last year. And that was great. I really liked Mexico City. I mean, Mexico's like, for the kind of music we make, we're actually really popular in Mexico. We had no idea. The promoters were saying the people are really excited you're coming to play. And we go, aren't we just like a little cult band? And they said, no, you've been really popular here for 30 years. We never didn't even know. And it's an amazing gig, and people knew all the music, and they're really, you know, Mexicans are really intense about their music. You know, when you play, they're like this, you know, it's all about the heart for the Mexicans, and what an amazing audience to play to, you know, fantastic people. I was in Mexico City for about 5 days, and it was a fantastic trip. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. You're definitely right, especially for a culture who's so rooted in musical history. It's a part of everything, and that's one thing that I've always just revered about the culture. It's just that love and compassion for community and music and family all together. So it's only makes sense to get such a warm welcome when going there, with just the way that the culture embraces people. So that.
Well, when we're in LA,
family.
when we tour America these days, we always use LA as our base because we have friends and fans who are Mexican. They got this really nice house. They just give us the run of the house. They're not even there sometimes. We have the whole house, and you get really the Mexicans in LA. They really love punk or post-punk music. It's totally their music and that, and you know, so it's like living in the Mexican community for a couple of weeks, just popping out doing gigs, California, up and down, Seattle, Phoenix, and we just do the drives back. It's a long drive back, but it's worth it just because it's nice staying in their house, hanging out with their mates and that, you know. And they're the snappiest dressers as well. They always have the perfect crease in the trousers, you know, they're the best quiffs you've ever seen in your life, you know, because they have like really thick hair, so it's immaculate, isn't it, you know. And their love of British music is the same, you know. It's hard to understand how it clicks because culturally it's quite different. You know, we're probably like you are, melancholic, damp climate people, and they're all hot weather people. But somehow there's a connection which goes through music. I mean, people always gone about Morrissey having all Mexican fans, which he does, but they love Bauhaus. They love all British punk, post-punk. It's huge music for them, you know. Those bands, Bauhaus will play in Mexico City to like 10,000 people, you know.
which is unreal. And but you bring up a good point, because like just the kindness, the generosity, the open-mindedness, the progressiveness, it's all been every Spanish family I've been kind enough to share time with, or friends that I've grown up with, always have showed me just nothing but kindness, generosity, and community.
What I like to add to that is I find Americans like that as well. I think Americans are very generous people. And it's surprisingly, if you stay with Americans, they'll give you anything, It's friendly, it's very upbeat. And this is why I have a real difficulty reconciling how you have your president. Is to me, he's like the opposite of everything I've ever seen in America. I know it's easy to play in people's fears. I don't want to get into too deep here or anything. We can't be bothered with it. But he does not represent the America I know. The America I know of very embracing, very sociable, very generous people. And it just seems to be hoodwinked by a small percentage of people who are the complete opposite, like selfish, insane people.
You're absolutely right. Like, the representation that we currently have here right now is the worst parts of this country. And I'll be absolutely bold to say that. I have no qualm saying that whatsoever. It does not represent the best interest. It is literally the grittiest, dirtiest parts of this country, the parts that hide and have been hiding in deep alleyways and, just hidden in the infrastructure for years. But unfortunately, we've lived in a system that's allowed this type of xenophobic, homophobic, racist thinking to go, unfortunately, unchecked. And it's good. It's good that individuals are stepping up and saying, no, fuck this. We're done. That is the true ethos of this country. This country was founded to escape religious persecution and then the option to be truly an individual. Here we are over 200 years later, and some things have not changed,
So it's interesting this, because I think this is punk rock terms, this idea of being an individual, which is a great tenet of punk rock. But also, as it plays out, it becomes quite dangerous, because it becomes... The line between Johnny Rotten and Margaret Thatcher isn't that long in the end. It was great when Rotten turned the Pistols. It was about I'm an individual. But that's what Thatcher said as well. There's no such thing as society. And when you play out the individualism, which I do respect in a sense, but you end up with a society full of individuals and no society. And what the virus did, it put a mirror on this. So the countries that are empathetic and have empathetic leadership, like New Zealand, where you care about all the people, and I know it's easier for them because less of them and they're an island, but they've done all right in this virus situation. But if you look at the UK and America, where it's all about the individual, nobody tells me what to do, nobody tells me to wear a face mask and look after everybody else, it's a fucking disaster. You got America run by a person who doesn't care about anybody apart from himself. Of course it's going to be a disaster with the virus. Let's hope. And one of the great tenets of punk rock was do it yourself. I prefer to call it do it together. I think it's working together should be the real key to what punk rock was. It's not about me. And doing this interview, I don't care if people buy my records or not. If they want to listen to my music, great. But there's loads of other people's music is great. I can tell you about as well. Go and listen to their music as well, because I think we should be sharing the culture instead of dominating it like some crazy dictator.
I couldn't agree more. And you know what? DIT, do it together. That's the first time that I've ever heard that. I've been DIY as fuck my entire life, just self-ambitious, just trying to get things done. But it's right. It's never an isolated, alone, individualistic thing, because it takes a village, and even with this, I've got a massive amount of people behind the scenes that help me with so much here. I like the DIT. I'm going to have to adopt that.
But you're already doing it. You just use the wrong term for it, because by doing a radio show, you do a radio show for nothing, playing other people's records so other people get to hear them. That already is DIT, so it's whereas DIY, you just be playing your own music all day long.
Perspective's everything. That's great.
DIY is actually the wrong term, because it always was DIT. People were working together, and if you work, I always look at music as a communal thing. I think when you're in a room playing in a band, we're just the lightning rod, really. We're just the excuse for people to experience some kind of art freedom for an hour or so. It's not about us. It's about everybody in the room, even the people working in the room. And I like that idea of it. It's a celebration of a culture, and for that night, we're in your town celebrating that culture with you. It's not about we're not there to hypnotise or enslave you into our campaign for greatness. We're just there to help creating a piece of sound for you to celebrate your life as well. and we're all sharing the energy, and it's a conduit, and it goes backwards and forwards. We're feeding off you, you're feeding off us, and I think, to me, that's what DIT is as well.
You're absolutely right, because it's this energy, it's this shared almost consciousness in a moment where you're all coming together and you're able to just become one within the moment. You're sharing the music, you're sharing the energy. That's one of the things that I miss so much about live shows, is just going into a crowd and you just lose yourself. You let go of inhibition, you drop your guard, and for a moment you are your true self, just fully revealed into the world as you're dancing in the dark with 10 strangers or 1,000 strangers, you know? And it's very life affirming. You know, it's things that some people might not understand, especially with a little bit more aggressive music. Like it's therapeutic. It's an absolute release, you know? When I was young and dumb and very angry, my intent at shows was drastically different because I was working on a bunch of complex emotions, as people often are when they're going through adolescence. And so I was young and angry, and I had the wrong mentality going into shows because I simply just wanted to hurt people because I was hurting. So I was young and dumb and angry. When you drop that and you realize that we're all together in this, we're all united, and we're all connected through this common cause that's happening here in front of us, you realize that there's so much more value in that situation. Instead of just going and looking at it at face value, like, oh, here's a show, let's go fucking have some fun, where you can actually go and connect with people in those moments in the pit, on the dance floor, or even backstage or in the parking lot, connecting with people from all around the world. And you realize just how small this world really is, and just how comparable and how similar we all are at the end of the day.
It's actually valid though, if you're young and angry and screwed up, to have a space to work that out. Like going to see a punk rock psychiatrist, a high decibel punk rock psychiatrist, isn't it?
And you learn about true, though.
You learn about community, and also you learn you're not the only person who feels like that, and there's other people. You know, that's one of the great things I found when I got into punk in the 70s, growing up in Blackpool, that, you know, you're always on the outside. It was an outsider's culture. You know, it was a people, probably, in the end, it was a really weird mixture of people who were really macho and also people really sensitive. And it wasn't like a load of psychopaths. It wasn't like, even someone like Sid Vicious was not a hard person. He was like he just a big daft sod, really. He was in a mess, you know, mentally not a great place. But a lot of people know him, say his real life version of himself was not his public persona. And that, to me, that typifies what punk was. It wasn't that macho. It was blokes who weren't real blokes. It wasn't like the jocks, as you call them in America, the sports types, just all the leftovers, all the uncool kids, the nerds, the freaks. And that, to this day, it's true that, and it empowers those people as well. It gives them the confidence to be themselves, maybe to become creative, or just to be themselves in life. You know, you don't have to be the coolest kid in the class to be the coolest kid in the class, do you? And in the end, you very quickly realise that all the jocks aren't really that cool at all. You know, they're actually, you know, they're just, you know, and I think that's a powerful thing about music and a powerful thing about punk, that it did empower all those other people to do something good. And I've always thought the quietest people are the most interesting people as well. You know, if I do events where I'm chairing panels, I'm always fascinated by the person who's not saying very much because they're thinking before they talk.
which here, man, that is a tenet that is lost on so many people, is that they just speak without thinking. You know, they say words without understanding the power, the weight, and the meaning that they're putting into them. And I think this is where we're having so many issues right now, especially in the United States, where you have all this isolationism, you have everybody being confined, and unfortunately they're stuck with their own thoughts. And for some of us, that's a blessing, because we're so busy in our lives, we actually haven't had a down moment to think. So some of us came out of this with a new mindset, you know, went through a mental evolution, kind of shed some old skin into something new. Where other ones, unfortunately, the pressure has seemed to gotten to them, because you give people this open platform to say whatever they want, but then you have this extreme isolationism, you have all this fear mongering, and then you end up with these perfect storms of people doing horrible, desperate acts, vile acts to one another. And all it if they could take a little bit of a moment to listen and to think before they speak and to properly engage, to educate, I don't think we'd be in half the messes that we are right now.
The danger of these times is with the internet, which I love the internet, and I've been using the internet. Well, I was the first person I knew that even had an email. I couldn't even email anybody else because nobody I knew had emails. I've been on it for years. But I've seen that drift towards everything's black or white. So if you ask me a question, I have to give you 100% answer, negative or positive. I'm not allowed to say, do you know what, I'm not sure. and everybody's become working with their own little online communities. So a really racist person will only speak to other racist people and become more racist. And then the other people won't speak to them. And no one speaks to, and everyone's speaking to these little groups. And everything's getting really, everyone's stretching further and further apart. I think the danger of these times is there's too much shouting and not enough listening. And I like to listen to people, what they say, even if I don't agree with them. I think we have to reach out to the people on the other side. So the big lunatic grizzly bear Trump fan with 6 machine guns in his belt in your town was standing next to the statue. It's almost impossible, but how do we reach that person? Do we say, you know what, I like some AC/DC tracks as well. So now we have something in common. Let's sit down and see if we can talk this out. We probably can't, but is there a way we could do this? Or are we just going to stand there like scowling at each other for the rest of our lives, which we probably are, but that's not a solution. I don't see that as a solution in a sense, you know. And I think this idea that you can see it, the whole world's stretching further and further apart. In America, I look at it's a bit like the UK, but it's, of course, being America is a slightly more exaggerated version. It's become very schizophrenic. It's like a country in a nervous breakdown. You've got whole communities who can't communicate with each other. And I know for years they didn't really communicate with each other, but there was some kind of communality somewhere in the middle of it all, and that's disappearing. And that's dangerous. That's a drift towards civil war, isn't it? And that's not a solution either. You know, no one wins a war. You know, it's like when people get in a fight at school. The person who beats the person up's not won. They've had to damage somebody. That doesn't make anybody feel good unless they're a psychopath. So these aren't winning situations, are they? I know this all sounds a bit hippie and not very punk rock. But I think the challenge is to try and create the lines of communication, try and listen to people. It's almost like some kind of, in meditation, there's a meditation on death. And if you meditate on death or the person you really hate, you have to meditate the person you hate, which is it's really difficult. But you've got to try and look at all their positive qualities. And you know what? It's actually not a bad idea. You know, it might not make the world better, but actually, it will make the world better because it's an attempt to build a bridge. You may never build that bridge, but maybe you got to attempt to build that bridge. And this idea of putting your fingers in your ears because you don't agree with somebody is not working.
I couldn't agree more, you know, because you can, unfortunately, there are individuals in the world who will, like I said, on both sides, put on blinders. Like, no, this doesn't reflect my personal beliefs, so fuck you, you're gone, you're blocked, you're deleted, whatever it is, so on and so forth, you know? And that's really not a way to handle the problem whatsoever, because unfortunately you just destroyed the bridge of communication. And you're right. That there needs to be this sense of hubris, of self-awareness. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, what people need to realize is that on each side right now of this horrible dividing line that we are, each side is scared. One is a little bit more realistic than others, and it really comes down to one side is horribly afraid of things that they don't understand. And you're right, they're maintained in small social circles, so racists are just adding gasoline to the fire to other racists. And then same with some individuals on the other side who are more liberal in thinking, where they're also pouring gasoline on their fire, and nobody is actually trying to take a means of communication to be like, let's sit down and talk about the things that to see if we can find a commonality. You know, let's have an educated conversation on the things that you're afraid of in this country. I'll have an educated conversation on the things that I'm afraid for this country, and let's see if we can find a common ground together. And let's see if maybe we can have that aha moment, that social epiphany, where you realize that we're all just one and the same, and it's simply a matter of countries are just lines drawn in the sand with a stick, and it's a matter of how close you live to the equator. There's no difference between any of us, no matter wherever we are in the world.
again, it's DIT, isn't it? Do it together. I mean, I know which side I'm on. I'm on the side of Black Lives Matter people. I'm on the side of the Liberals demonstrating, you know. But it's not going to. I don't see how we're going to win this because it's 50% versus 50%, and nobody's budging, you know. And it's got to be somewhere where we find a solution to the problems. And then, you know, I don't want to see civil war. I don't want to see people fighting in the streets. I mean, I know I'm meant to be very punk rock and cheer along with the revolution, but in history, revolutions never win. From the French Revolution to any revolution, the people in power, the right, always get in. You know, I'm sure some listeners to this now can email and say, well, what about the revolution of 1326, which I'd forgotten about off the top of my head or something? But usually it doesn't result, you know, you get a revolution condition state and then the army's in, you know, like Joe Stunner sang in it in the English army is waiting out there, White Man Hammersmith Palais. That's what he was singing about, isn't it? You know, to get effective change, make a better world, a revolution is not going to get it. You know, you got to defeat them. You got to defeat these people with reason. And it's hard. It's really hard, isn't it? It's more difficult, but you've got to remain positive as well. As I think that's important as well. It was interesting because last time I was in America was a year and a half ago, and I was at South by Southwest. We went there to interview people. For Lush, the soap company, kind of like a liberal soap company, and we weren't interviewing music people, we were interviewing people trying to make a change in the world. So we met some great people. There's a guy who's quite high in the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm still in touch with him actually. He's a really cool guy. And there was people organising women's groups in Miami and things like that. And they were good actually because they wanted to be embracing. They didn't want to be on the outside. They wanted to be in the mainstream, and they wanted to make sense of what was going on in America. Because what we were saying was, it look from our point of view, all you ever see is Trump talking rubbish on Twitter and that's the international idea what America is. And they said no, America's actually grassroots. America's very, very different. And they said Trump's probably the best thing that's ever happened to them. Because these kind of women's meetings, these have like one person turning up, and now they had to go and get a bigger premises because it annoyed so many people that people actually thought, I've got to do something about this. And they were saying in places like Miami or whatever, or Florida, there's far more women councils or representatives in the local communities than there ever have been before. So grassroots America was very different looking from top down. The problem's always the top, isn't it? The top play these games. They divide and rule, isn't it? You know, they wind up the grizzly bears and their machine guns to get out in the streets to so if people are arguing with them, they're not arguing with the people who really control the levers, the people who create austerity, the people who keep all the money. I mean, I don't know how people like Donald Trump were ever looked on as a champion of the blue collar workers when he's got a gold lift in a gold tower in New York City. You know, it's just utterly immoral, isn't it? You know, but people still see him as being their champion. If he's really their champion, he'd be like selling that and giving all the money away, wouldn't he? You know.
And you're right. You're absolutely right. If he was this blue-collared, you know, champion of the people, you would think that there'd be proper wealth distribution within this country. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But we have an individual in power that is simply just instigating the situation, and it's gotten to the point that all you need to do is just raise an eyebrow. And you're right. Here comes our American Jesus with a Marlboro from his lip and an AK-47 on his hip, you know. And
this is the weird thing. How come all these religious people have machine guns? I don't get that at all. If Jesus came back today, he'd be looking at Jerry Falwell Jr. going, Who are you? I think you missed the point here. You know, I mean, he was. I mean, obviously Jesus was a mythical figure or a mythological version of a real figure. I don't know, but he was more of a hippie type character, wasn't he? He wasn't somebody who was saying, if you pay me $50, you'll get to heaven if you come to my church. He was. The story they never tell you, all these religious dudes in America, is that Jesus went to the moneylenders' tables in Jerusalem, kicked all the tables over, didn't he? Because the moneylenders were immoral. But of course, somehow they turned it around, and the moneylenders are now running the Christian church in America. It's a complete opposite of what the whole ideology was about in the first place. But maybe that's human nature, and like you were saying before, maybe it's all driven by fear, isn't it? People are scared of dropping out the bottom. If you've got a society where there's no safety net, people will scramble and fight to make money in any way possible to just survive. It was shocking now when Sylvain from the Dolls, the guy who formed the Dolls, the driving force of the New York Dolls, and we love the New York Dolls in England. They made such a cultural change here to very few people, but without the Dolls, punk rock probably wouldn't have started here, in a sense. And when Sylvain got ill, there was a crowdfunder for him, and it's like, over here you go. What do you mean there's a crowdfunder for Sylvain? He's got to sell his house to get treatment for his cancer. What? That is absolutely insane, because we're so used to it here, even though they are trying to dismantle it behind our backs, the national health system. It's a sign of civilization. Of course, if you've got a country, it's not high moral ground. It's just like, this is what you do. You put a little bit of money in the pot to look after your neighbours, It's, I don't understand that, because in America, it's a very neighbourly culture, but somehow they hoodwinked you into thinking this is a communist ideal to have a health system. It's not a communist ideal at all. It's a humanist ideal. It's about looking after people. You could be a Republican. Surely you could be even a Republican would believe that if their 82-year-old neighbour was really ill, she doesn't have to crowdfund to go get treatment in a hospital. I mean, that's just been anti-human. It's not a left-right issue. It's about just looking after people, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because it's not a left-right issue. It's a human issue. And it's something that I see every day in the line of work that I do, where I work specifically with people with different disabilities. And, this Christian ideology of love thy neighbor, it's on everything here in America, but I don't actually see at least from that social group, that extent. They're the same, and it was like love thy neighbor, but they have the 10-foot Trump sign, and blue lives fucking matter. There's no fucking blue lives. It's a fucking job. Get out of here. And don't get me started on that one. But, and then they build these massive, 10, 12-foot fences, literally fences to divide everybody. And nobody's actually taking an active participant role in physically being there for your neighbor. And you're right. What is wrong with this country when individuals have to crowdfund or sell their house in order to get medical treatment? That's insane. We spend all these money on big machines and big fucking bombs, and we just completely spend all this money to keep puffing our chest and puffing our chest and puffing our chest. And one of these days, we're going to burst,
Of course. It's only a finite. Actually, luckily for you, you've got another 100 years of it, because not the political system, but of America itself. Because I did read a great book about this, the geopolitical way the world works. It says America is actually the perfect country in the world. 2 coastlines, so it dominates 2 oceans, lots of natural resources. A lot of it's quite flat, so you can move stuff around very easily. A lot of space to fit people in. It's got 2 relatively, Canada's a very good neighbour for America. Canada's never going to invade America, is it? And even Mexico, they kind of got a control over Mexico. Although it's interesting in Mexico, because Mexico's economy is going up and up and up. So it's at the moment, I think it's the 15th most powerful economy in the world, but people don't really notice that, because in America there's this idea that everyone in Mexico wants to get into America because it's number one, but as gradually Mexico's kind of inching up behind America. So our joke of Mexico City is you're going to have to build that wall to stop the Americans coming into Mexico.
So honestly, it's going to be a matter of time. Like,
I
make jokes all the time that here in Maine we're little Canada, and they can adopt us anytime, and I will gladly become a Canadian citizen. I have no qualms with that whatsoever.
Well, I'm 1/4 Canadian, so I'll let you in. Yeah, my granddad's from Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that's not far from you, is it?
No, not at all. Actually,
6 hours, something like that.
Yeah, about 6-7 hours, maybe a little bit more to get to Nova Scotia, but we're not too far from where I am.
I mean, I have no Canadian vibe at all, because he was only in the UK for 3 days, and he met my grandmother on the docks in London. I looked him up on the internet. This is quite, for me personally, quite an interesting story because my granny, she never said anything about it, but she told, finally when she was on her 100th birthday, I went to the 100th birthday, and she said, and this is what got me interested, she goes, and we didn't really see that granny that much, about every 5 years, whatever, and she turned up in the old people's home, she goes, you look really like him, and I go, oh, that was quite weird, got blue eyes, very blue eyes, so I thought, I'm going to look him up, I'm going to see if that's true, so I didn't know anything, I only knew his name, and the power of Google, innit? I looked him up and I found the one photograph that existed of him. And he didn't look like me so much, but he looked really like my dad. And as soon as I saw the picture, about 6 people, and they go, oh my God, that's him, innit? He looked exactly like my dad. And my dad never met him because he never came. He worked on the cable ships going across the Atlantic, laying the cables underneath the Atlantic. Very dangerous job. UK 1920, he got off the boat, bit of R&R, then went back on the boat again. And he wasn't allowed to marry my grandmother because he was Catholic and she was Protestant, which is another weird old days thing, and so they weren't allowed to get married. And so I tracked him down. I know where he's buried, and one day I'm going to go to Halifax. I'm going to go to the grave. I know where his house is. It's amazing the stuff you can find. I found a picture of his house, and also found a picture of, he used to own a chip shop, fish and chip shop in Halifax, and I found a picture of it where it used to be, but now it's a dual carriageway and that. So I found out all about his life, and I got quite, because I'm really interested in history. And I like people's history as well. I'm more interested in the history of people than in kings and queens. I don't really care about the names of all the kings and queens. I rather know what the guy who's farming pigs, or the woman who's drowned for being a witch. I'm more interested in those people's lives than the kings and queens, because that's the true story of lives now. So for me, this is perfect, because it's just a normal guy who works in the ship. And his life was fascinating to me because he was somebody obviously I'm attached to because he's my grandfather, but I knew nothing about him. He's like a completely different person. So it's like, and you're trying to find any kind of commonality, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because it's somebody you never met. Yeah.
Now that's really interesting, because I'm right there with you. I mean, it's literally like the embodiment of my show is that anthropological study of individuals. Like, we know history is written by the winners, so it's completely jaded. It's one-sided. It's very opinionated. It's very biased. It's not very journalistic. So individuals like us, we like the people's history. I'm more fascinated, like you said, by the pig farmer, or the individual setting a solar farm, or the things of that nature. Just like personal stories of triumph, and everyone's got their own story, and it's a beautiful, unique thing, and you never know where it's going to take you. And that's one of my favorite things about what I get to do here, is I get to hear all these amazing stories, and I get this small little vignette, this little window into this other world, and I'm humbled by every single experience by it.
There's also no truth either. It's all just shades of opinion or fragments of memory as well. I mean, when I wrote my book about Punky, it was like that, because every single person contradicted every other person. Some people like John Robb, famous, of course, contradicting himself every 2 sentences. And I like that as well. I like the way it's contradictory, because my memory of this conversation will be completely different from yours, and that should be. There's no such thing as a hard truth. It does change, and also your own memories of things change as well. So the idea there's a very black and white history, this happened then because of that, isn't quite true, And, it's interesting with George Washington with America, because he didn't really want to separate from the UK. He was actually quite patriotic. He liked he liked King George, didn't he? He wanted to stay. It's only because the British are so stupid that they not. Also, this thing we never get taught here in England. When America became independent, we always get taught that it's the whole of America, but it's only that corner that you're in. The French and the Spanish had bigger colonies in America, and of course, everybody forgets the Native Americans, who also had their own 30,000-year history and their own little mini empires and their own story to tell. This is the interesting thing about Black Lives Matter, because no matter how divisive it is making people reevaluate their histories, isn't it? I mean, how many people know about African history? Africa had histories of empires rising and falling, and it's not the countries it is now. They're just drawn on there by European colonialists who just the northern boundary of Nigeria was drawn by a British governor's wife, bored on a Sunday afternoon with a ruler and a pencil. It's just completely random, like line like that. I mean, the border between Canada and America's like that, and it's just along, what's it called? It's just a random geographical. Oh God, I can't remember the word of it now. But it's not actually really a border, is it? It could have been anywhere.
And you're right. And it is, because it's if you head up to that part. I mean, there's areas and people, especially with Trump, build a wall. There are so many places in northern Maine you could accidentally go into Canada. You literally can just be driving through a street and all of a sudden, oh shit, you just crossed the border and you didn't even realize it. Everyone's talking about, we got to do things about the border. It's just a fucking line drawn in the sand with a stick. Like, it's so ancillary. And even here, like, it's a bored housewife one day and I'm just going to draw a line. Yeah, that looks like a country. Sure.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, a border between Canada and America is really arbitrary because the people aren't that different. Although it's interesting with Canada, I remember the first time I went there in the 80s, and everybody's a great pain to tell you how they were not American. There'd be pictures of the Queen everywhere. We're with you guys. We're more English than anybody in America is. And it'd be like everything they did was like, we're really into, what do they call it, protp, that gravy and chips or whatever, which is they invented in 1969. That's a traditional dish there. And they have all these things that they don't have that in America. We're really Canadian. We're very different from them. But I went 2 years ago. And what I really noticed was people didn't do that anymore because they were confident in their own Canadianness. It did feel like, even though it's very similar, and you could be Canadian. It's not. But in a way, they had a confidence about being Canadian, which they never used to have. They used to think that everybody thought they were just a state of America that was stuck on the top. Now they know they're Canadian, and I think, especially now with Trump, it's redefined that, America's got this thing where it's kind of gone down that road and they've kind of gone down a different road. I'm not saying that Trudeau's perfect because there are a lot of flaws there, but it's a general different vibe in Canada, which they know about. And especially when you get to the French part, which is, God, I didn't realise how European that part was. It's, you go to, which I always mix them up. Which one's the really old one? Is it Montreal or Quebec? One of them looks like a French city from 1800.
They're both pretty French dominant cities.
There's people there that couldn't speak English.
I haven't been to Montreal.
Yeah, I think Montreal was the bigger one, and Montreal's got the big skyscrapers.
Yeah, it's the bigger city.
Yeah, Quebec had very French-looking old buildings. And I liked them both. Well, because my granddad was French Canadian, so I was vibing off that. But I was thinking, hey, it's my people. Because my real name's actually Landry. But when he got christened, my granny just gave me dad the name of her current boyfriend at the time. But the guy who she got made pregnant by was called Landry. So if she'd actually done it by the book, I should actually be called John Landry. So which was my dad's middle name, and we used to laugh at that because we used to think, what a weird name. What kind of name is Landry? We had no idea it was a French Canadian surname. We thought it was a really posh kind of name that he'd been given. So, but as the years rolled by, I thought, oh God, he actually had the French Canadian name in his name. And it's quite a common name in French Canada, isn't it?
And here in Maine too, there are plenty of Maine families around us. Oh, absolutely. And even there's a big part of Maine that is still very Franco-American. A lot, especially the further you get towards the Canadian border. A lot of small towns in Maine, their cuisine, their restaurants, even the individuals living there, strong, predominant French accents that.
Wow, I love the way those echoes stay, aren't they? But it's interesting because the French weren't really there that much in the first place because they got kicked out of New Orleans. They went up to Canada, didn't they? Because even the word Canada is the name Arcadian, isn't it? It's the name for the French settlers in New Orleans originally. So it's been displaced twice, isn't it? The other thing is, it's quite funny, even though they're really pro-French, the French laugh at them, don't they? Because they speak this really old French from the 16th century. So people in Paris who are quite snobby actually, but they kind of look down on the French Canadians. But the French Canadians are the most pro-French people you're ever going to meet.
It's true.
I like to say that because it's my people.
And it is very, very true. And like I said, that French Canadian pride, it is very predominant here. And you get that, which is good, you know? Like there's nothing wrong with understanding your heritage and being a part of it. It's when that overshadows everybody else's in the world where that becomes that's not something
I
that
totally
we see with
agree.
that community.
I think there's a lot of positives about. See, patriotism is such a weird word, isn't it? Because it does come with such awful baggage. But there are things that a lot of countries do that are really good. And you think, I'm glad I live in a country that did that. but I should also recognise all the bad shit. So in Black Lives Matter terms, I live in a country that banned the slave trade. But I also live in a country that made the slave trade into like on an industrial scale, you know, and it was completely awful for doing it, you know. We didn't get taught that much at school, but it was on television a bit, so it was coming in a little bit, but not enough from that. And I think it's good to recognise both, you know, the good sides and the really evil sides of your country, you know. So it's, but not that, you know, my country's the best in the world. I never really get that one. I mean, I like coming from England, I'd probably never live anywhere else because there are a lot of good things about the country. You know, we can be quite progressive. I live in Manchester; it's a very progressive modern city. But there are other corners of this country which I don't really recognise as much. But I don't think I live in the best place in the world and everyone else is just an idiot. You know, that kind of patriotism, I don't really understand it at all, you know, because I like to think in terms of the whole planet, really. That we are all joined together and everything's joined together. We're joined to nature, we're joined to the universe, isn't it? And we don't float above everything.
You're right, you know, because unfortunately, history is doomed to repeat itself unless we actually learn the lessons from the past. So you can sit there, you can pretend like they didn't happen, which is a typical American education. Let's just smooth out these edges and let's not talk about the horrible genocide that this country was responsible for. They pave over that, like I said, because history is written by the winners, and so the dirty things, the bad parts, you know, those stories don't get told, you know, but they're still a part of you, and either you learn to accept and recognize that so you can learn and grow and develop, or we end up rooted in the past, which is where we're in this influx right now, is that we have so many individuals here, the grassroots America, the open-minded progressiveness, love is love, nobody's illegal, everybody's a person group, that there are so many of us that are fighting to champion those individual freedoms just to be yourself. And then there's those dark, shadowy parts of the United States that are holding on to those racist, bigoted, sexist, misogynistic ideals. And it's an unfortunate nature of the beast, but I will say this, dinosaurs will die, you know, and it's hard because when the cause and effect that you see that these individuals are having on society around them, you know, you have racist raising little racist, you know. I see, you know, kids that protest wearing pro-Trump gear and hats, and they're only 4 or 5 years old. They have no idea what they're being introduced to. They're not giving the opportunity to think for themselves and make their own decisions. I am so fortunate that I grew up in the type of household that allowed me to be able to explore those different things, even though I was raised by a biker and a hippie, you know, at heart, you know. So it's just like, yeah, love your brother, your sister, love all the people around you, but also be willing to stand up and fight for your convictions at the same time. So I was raised in that amazingly supportive environment, which so many other people here in the United States, we're all one and the same. There's tons of us in that grassroots movement, which I say the true America, the actual pulse, what has made this country what it is over the last 250 plus years, the fringe culture, you know, all those fringe movements have all became mainstream movements, you know. And a lot of them all start with a person of color here in the United States that had immigrated here, you know, and America is just a melting pot of different cultures from all around the world. And one of the truest things that we do have, I would say, is our carnival culture, which is merely adopted from Europeans and the Irish all coming over and then bringing in different bits of their folklore and history and melting into ours. And that's one of the parts of U.S. history that I love, that sideshow carnival circus culture, because it was absolute fringe, and then it became this big showcase and spectacle. And this now it's what they use for stadiums and everything. The same idea, the same pomp and circumstance that was originally a borrowed culture idea is now the mainstream. And you can say the same for music, for food. I mean, God, look at Americans' history on barbecue. All of that borrowed culture, and nobody wants to give true credit to where these things actually came from. And it's because we are a melting pot of just all these amazing individuals from the world, and that's what you get. When it's everything but the kitchen sink. We're all mixed here together, and we created this unique, beautiful thing that is that true grassroots America, that you can go walk down the street and you can have Greek food or Thai food, or you can go over here to this Bezraka to go to a Russian deli, and it's this big melting pot of culture and diversity. And people are forgetting about the neighbors around them, and they're putting their blinders back on again.
Yeah, I mean, that's the true America, isn't it? But when you go to the smallest places, the high street is, you can eat your way around the world down the high street, can't you? But they're the voices you don't hear. But that's the other thing about nowadays. The idiots shout the loudest. All you ever hear is the biggest. Those grizzly bears, machine guns, don't represent America. They don't even represent 2% of America, but you just see them on the news. Most Americans are quiet, decent people. Even what the Trump voters are decent people who probably haven't worked it all out, but they're kind of old school Republicans voting for the Republican guy. They don't really like him that much, but that's what they do, isn't it? They're probably voting for him in what they believe is the best reasons, not because of the selfishness which he represents. But all you ever hear is him shouting. I want to hear the real American voices.
It's like when you go to a restaurant and you see a family eating, and then one of the kids just has an outburst, and they're crying and they're screaming, and all you can think of, like, oh man, that kid just won't shut the fuck up. Why are they screaming? I mean, everybody's noticing that screaming, crying baby there in the moment, but you don't see the other two kids having a perfectly civil conversation. That is what it's like to be in America, where it seems like the loudest voice wins the argument. But that's as we said before, that's not a sense of victory or anything like that. It just means that you were the loudest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Maybe you have to be patient, wait for the tantrum to get tired out.
and they will, and that's the thing, is if individuals stop pouring gasoline on the fire, some of these, I hate to say it, these crying babies will just shut the fuck up. Just let them cry themselves to sleep. Sit there, put your sure, you can scream all the racist, horrible things that you like. If we stop feeding into it and giving them the limelight that they so justly want, then they're gonna just eventually die away. A parasite is only as strong as its host.
Yeah, it's true, which is quite ironic these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
Now, John, we've really been deep social look at the things that are happening around us, and I love that. And I wouldn't expect anything less from you. But it's one thing that I want to take a few moments here is to get to know you a little bit more, because you're not just, member of the membranes. You've been an active journalist, an author, you've been a public figure, and so involved in things happening there in the UK for over 3 decades. So I want to jump back. We're going to hit the time machine here for a little bit. And I want to know about like the early days of forming the Membranes and what it was like being in a punk band in the late 70s and the 1980s, because it was such a different time then, but yet it's still comparable to what's happening now.
It's interesting because punk was a very different thing then. It's for us. Well, I grew, initially it was glam rock. That's what really intrigued me when I was 12, 13. We used to watch T-Rex, David Bowie, and even the bands, considered less glam bands, were still great. Slade, Sweet. Used to love all those bands. All the pops. We had no idea we could actually make music ourselves. The clarion call from punk was, you can make this music. So when Buzzcocks put their first single out, band based in Manchester, great band, the first single, Spiral Scratch EP, homemade record, an independent record, the first independent record of that generation. Somebody brought it to school and go, wow, you can actually make your own records. You don't have to go get a record deal or anything. Because getting a record deal that was London. It could have been out of space for us. So we were very homespun band. We did our first gig. We didn't even know how to play guitars. Didn't know how to tune them up. We just stood there, we never plugged into amps before. We just plugged in and just made a racket, you know. And it's just of doing it, which is different now because I see modern punk bands, and I'm not slagging these off because every band has a purpose. So a band like Blink-182 actually aren't that modern anymore 20 years ago. But that kind of very monolithic major label version of punk, these people are really brilliant musicians. You know, their drummer's an incredible drummer.
Oh yeah.
And you know, they're very well produced. It's very melodic, but it's very different for the punk that we got. But we would think that the Pistols and the Clash were like that, but they were actually really good players as well. But we actually fell for the whole thing. We thought anybody could do this. That was the message. So we did get on stage. Of course you can't do it. You just plug in and it's just a horrible noise, and everybody sits there, their fingers in their ears. But that was actually, to me, that was the real spirit of punk. I mean, my drummer was 13 and he couldn't play drums. He didn't know what kick pedal was or anything. And from that, we sort of worked out how to make that into our type of music. And to this day, I don't really know many scales. I know a few chords, but I just make the music I can hear in my head and I work it out backwards. And I know that's not a very good tip for anybody who wants to make a career in the music business. And it's interesting because when I interviewed Peter Hook from Joy Division New Order, he's the same. He can't play the cover versions. He writes some of the most exquisite, brilliant bass lines of all time because he's honed down his own style of making music. And in a way, that's what punk was. That's an element of individualism I can embrace. This idea that if you're playing music, you make the music, that's you, you know. And there's no point. I don't want to see a covers band. I don't see the point of them. You know, it's never going to be as good as the original. I want to see somebody make an honest version of their own experience of being a human being in this place, this time, at this moment on this planet. And that's what we were when we were 13, 14, 15 in our band when we started. So in a sense, the Membranes are a time capsule of that. So even on the records now, we've sort of learned how to do stuff more. They are made in that spirit of that time. We could do more things now. I mean, we have a choir on the last album, but I tell them what to sing and I wave my arms at them and sort of make funny grunting noises and they turn it into music. But it's still an accurate reflection of what I hear in my head. And I'm sure your listeners go, quite, that's not very punk rock, but punk rock didn't have any parameters then either. It wasn't you know, guitar, bass, drums, singer. There was no rules. It was wide open. I mean, what punk was then, you could have Stranglers account was a punk band there, whereas now people think that doesn't quite fit. Suicide were counted as punks to some of us. You know, we were very much in that punk there's no boundary to the style of music. It could be anything. It wasn't a style of music, it was an attitude to making music and life as well. Because it went beyond the music, it's the clothes as well, and the attitude and the hair. Everything was homemade, it was your own version of it. And so that's why it made it really egalitarian art form, because everybody could define it in their own ways. But then in the end, it became a style of music. And I do like that style of music. I mean, I think Rancid are a fantastic band. They write really great songs. And I know those guys. And I think like Tim's a really great bloke. And Lars, you know, their hearts are in the right place. But they play style of music that is very much within the idea of what punk is. And they do it very, very well. Whereas my version of punk, I'm probably closer musically or artistically, people like Steve Albini or whatever, or Swans, or all those kind of bands you can't fit in anywhere, but they would have no chance without punk in a sense, you know. And to me, they're punk bands in the truest sense of music because there's 1, 2, 3 people's vision of music, and it may be out of step with everyone else, but that doesn't matter, you know. It wasn't. So to me, that was my interpretation of punk. Of course, that's wrong as well because no one's allowed to interpret punk. It's so precious to everybody. Your interpretation of punk will be different from mine, but it's as valid as mine, and that's what I liked about it. It wasn't a lot of other youth cultures or pop cultures that you have to obey all the rules, and I'm not really interested in the rules.
And you're right. Everybody has this different interpretation of like what punk rock is to them. To some, it might be more of the modern element. Be like, oh, you know, you need that 1 2 1 2 gallop. You know, you need to have those little triplets. And they look at it from a musical perspective. Or others, much like myself, it's more of an ethos. It's the ability to question in every bit of authority, any information, to question it, to be yourself. It's an ethos. It's a mindset. It's the waking up every day and not answering to somebody else's expectations of you. You get to be your truest self. And you said it's in your attitude, your clothing, your music, your representation. You know, being a punk doesn't mean being an asshole. It simply is just a more of an ideal of true self-expression. And those proper punk bands, they don't fit in any true category, but that's what I love about the genre, is that it's so open. Like, to me, that mindset, like the Talking Heads are like the perfect embodiment of that. You know, they came out and nobody expected it. No one told them what to do, you know. And when they started here in the States and just killing it, you know, Psycho Killer, you know, to some like, oh, that's classic rock. And be like, no, it will always be the epitome to me of punk rock, of just being yourself, putting it out there, and just going on this journey, you know, seeing where the road takes you. When I was young, I thought punk rock needed, you know, just like distorted guitars and heavy bass and fast drums. And then you start to learn more about the culture, because it is truly a defining culture, and it depends on where you look in the world. You know, you've got skate punk here in the United States. You've got proto punk, or like or Britpop in the UK, and so many different evolutions. Even Japanese punk rock, you know, drastically different than what's happening in the United States, and actually more comparable to what was happening in the 70s and 80s with kind of the surfer psychedelic influence on it. And it's amazing. You can go to all these different parts of the world and you're going to get something different, but it's still under the guise as punk rock. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it, and what's kept me engaged my entire life.
Every version is equally valid. That's what's really interesting about it. So it can be a very cliche version of punk rock, but I would still like it. I would still feel the energy and the excitement of the music. But I would probably tend to listen to more of the more left of centre ends of it. Not just I'm trying to be a smart ass, just because I'm more engaged in that kind of music and it pulls me in more. I mean, that's the interesting thing about music, isn't it? Because you can only like what you like. So that thing where people talk about guilty pleasures, to me, is bullshit, because I never feel guilty about liking something. You know, Britney Spears' Toxic is a really great pop record. It's a really great pop record, which I like to hear. And equally, I can listen to Swans, and it makes no sense to me at all, my musical taste. That's why I write about music. I'm trying to understand why I like all this completely disparate stuff, these little chunks of sounds. And it doesn't have to work to be. It's not there to be cool. I don't care if people think it's cool or not. I'm not interested in what people think. It's what I want to listen to. I'm interested in why I want to listen to it. Which is why I used to write about it. Well, I still write about it a lot.
And you're right. And that's one thing that I really try to embody here on the show, is like my musical tastes are all over the place. You know, it could be electronic to different pop music to heavy metal. You know, it doesn't matter. I'm simply just trying to find what I feel to be an honest representation of the artist. You know, sometimes it's a little bit more mainstream, sometimes it's not. It's just what speaks to you, and are you capable of dropping your inhibition enough to accept it and to own it. And there's, especially here in the States, there's a ton of just closed-mindedness when it comes to genre. Like, I only listen to hardcore. Like, I'm a hardcore punker. And you're like, you know, that's all well and good and all, but have you ever really sat down and listened to Ziggy Stardust? You know, have you done a deep dive, or even, oh my God, like even Bowie's last album, Black Star, before putting it out? Dude, Lazarus, every time I hear it, I just bawl. I bawl. It hits
incredible.
me right in the
It's an incredible record, isn't it? It's incredible how that record came out. Nobody knew what it was about, and then he died. Everyone goes, "Oh my God!" It was actually, you know, his resignation letter, wasn't it, from life? You know, And that thing where the star appears on the front screen about 3 months later, God, he had it so worked out, didn't he?
Yeah.
Without Bowie, you wouldn't have punk. I mean, that's such a founding father, literally, isn't it? You know, it's a key thing. But it's interesting now because a lot of those kind of in America, the punkers, the young kids, will not be able to make that connection because. But I guess the American version of punk obviously was always going to be different anyway. Because I always thought in America, rock music is so much a foundation of American culture. You know, rock and metal. And in the UK, punk was more pop music, really. The Sex Pistols were a pop band. They were a heavy pop band, but they were meant to they were meant to be number one in the chart, so meant to sound like a pop group. And to most people in America in the punk scene now would think that was like, oh, you can't do that. That's a sellout. But it makes no sense. To when you grew up with it, those groups are meant to be popular, you know. And it was great because if you lived in a crappy little town, they reached you. You know, it wasn't cult music for a load of hipsters. Like, oh, yes, you have to understand this music. It was just people, and for everybody. And I think even the most difficult ideas should be presented for everybody. It's interesting because they just put, you know, I don't know if you know the band This Heat, the underground band from the late 70s, and their music's quite esoteric, quite left field, but they just put their music up on Spotify, and there's an interview with them, and they would talk about, but we're a pop band, we're not meant to be underground. So even a band like that. I mean, nobody, I don't think anybody goes in a room to make music that only 26 earnest blokes are going to understand. And most people go in a room to make music they feel good making, and then you think, how come the rest of the world doesn't get this?
And you're right. When you sit there, you're like, if you're writing music just to fit into a small fringe category, you know, that's good and all, but like music's for everybody. So you can't expect, like, especially when you create something, it truly takes on its own life. You have no idea where it's going to take you. You know, I'm sure when Bowie started, he didn't think he was going to become the massive international superstar that he was and becoming the voice to so many different counterculture movements, you know, and just, you don't know what's going to happen when you go and create something, and it kind of takes a life of its own where it kind of gets into the listener's hands from there. And then this interpretation gets created. And then there's, like I said, almost this own perceived history around it. It becomes bigger than life. And Bowie's kind of one of those examples entirely, you know?
Yeah. Well, it took him a long time. You know, he had a hit in 1969, and he had 3 years of flops, you know, before he came back around again. So he was a culty figure for a long time, you know. See, it was quite a surprise when he got really big. But I like that. As a writer for years now, I've seen this band's a champion, and then eventually they make it, you know. And for ages you think, how come that doesn't connect? But it does connect to it. Just in a way, it's the media getting in the way because they have a very narrow idea of what should be listened to, and how you circumnavigate that. But now because of the internet, if you could, it's hard work because it's thousands of people you have to get to hear your music. But eventually, all those little connections get made. And I mean, I'm not talking about myself. I'm not that bothered really personal music, but there's other bands that are champion and go, this should be massive. How come this has not got through? And it will get there in the end, you know. And in a way, when I put my writing hat on, and you got your DJ hat on, this is what we do, isn't it? We champion things and go, you've got to hear this. This is amazing, you know.
And you're right. Because you build such a connection to it, and then you create this interpersonal relationship with everything that's happening around you. Oh, we lost camera.
Yeah, we become like. No, it's all right. Just there's a little buzz on the camera, so just checking it.
No
Are you
worries.
still there?
And
yeah, just go back to. Yeah.
So
I'll come back in a second. Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
There we are.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
there, you never know like what's going to happen when you create something. And like you said, the way that, especially when you find an artist that truly speaks to you, you make this deep interpersonal connection. It becomes such a massive part of your life, part of your personal soundtrack. Like you said, we champion them. Like, you have to hear this. You have to hear this because it had changed your entire mindset, you know. And that's the power of music, is your entire perspective can be flipped upside down with a show or even a single song.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about music. You could be sat in a bar and something comes on, and you go, "What is that?" Or somebody sends you a piece of music or a whole new form of music you never heard before. Then you go down the rabbit hole, don't you? Spend a whole month listening to North African desert music or something. You know, it's I mean, which is great music, Nawa music. But you can go in all these little directions that make no sense to you at all. But that's really great. I mean, of course, your core culture comes from that point of time when you really formed in it. So for me, punk was always the music that really formed my worldview. But I wasn't straitjacketed to buy it. You know, it didn't mean I'd have to only listen to punk records all my life. You know, I mean, I love them. I could spend all day listening to punk records, but I like to listen to stuff I've never heard before. So someone says, you know, here's something you may not know about. I'm there straight away. I want to get into it. You know, in a way, because it creates the same impact those punk records have when I was younger, because it was such a alien experience. Even though now a lot of punk records they sound like a continuation of glam in a sense. They don't sound that radically different. At the time, though, they sounded revolutionarily different. It's funny the tricks that time play on you. It's the first time I heard the Ramones. It sounded like a chainsaw. It was really, you go, wow, that guitar, it's just so bizarre sounding. Whereas now, the Ramones are classic rock. You know, Beach Boys, Beatles, Ramones on a radio station will not sound weird. They're all classic rock bands. The tragedy of the Ramones was, in their lifetime, they never got as big as the classic bands. You know, 20 years later, they would have been one of the biggest bands in the world, wouldn't they? In America, they never had a top 100 album. They got a number one T-shirt, though. But isn't this the double sadness to them? Is that everybody wears a T-shirt and hardly anybody ever bought the records?
Yeah, because exactly, it seems like more they became more of like an icon for that type of movement. But that's something that's very big, is that you see a lot of young kids wearing Ramones shirts and be like, oh, you like the Ramones?
Which is
like,
great. Because it's
cool.
It's all the culture. It's all the culture. I mean, they did have great artwork because what's his name, Arturo, whatever his name is, designed all the artwork. He's a great artist. I remember in New York, you used to be able to walk past his flat down the corner of CBGB's, and you look through the window, and then all the posters up with all his artwork on his wall. I remember looking through his window a couple of times. And it's and the thing about the Ramones was it was in a way it was showbiz. It was all worked out. They had great stage sets, great lighting. They had a team behind it, didn't they? Because it's all the stuff we didn't realise when we played the first gig. We just thought we're just like them, really. You just go and plug in and play. But I mean, he did their artwork, backdrop, lighting. It was a machine, the Ramones, wasn't it? They were on a proper label, you know. It was all worked out, you know, which is great. But they weren't like, you know, it wasn't a level playing field, basically. You know, when you were starting a band when you were a kid, 77, 78. The myth of punk that was all the bands were at the same level, but they weren't. You know, the Clash had a manager, and the Count and the Sex Pistols are on a proper label. You know, we were miles behind. we were stuck in a holiday town in the north of England, where you had to go and play in church halls, and there's no PAs. We were on the back foot for about 5 years. It took ages to catch up. Yeah,
that's wild, especially like you said. The playing fields were drastically different, especially for the time. You know, you had some of these bands like with proper representation, and they had like a well-oiled machine behind them, and then individuals.
Which is cool. I'm cheering them on. I think it's great. I mean, even Joy Division was a 10-piece band, really, because they're on an independent label. But Tony Wilson, who's this road just out here is named after Tony Wilson, the late Tony Wilson. He was a TV celebrity where I lived, and everybody knew him. He's famous around here, and they had a great producer, a great person doing the artwork. We were doing our own artwork, you know, with a pair of scissors and a little glue stick, trying to make it look right, and getting a lecture set and photocopying, cutting the letters up, which is great because you are making something out of what's available to you, but it's really hard to make it look really brilliant. You're never going to come up with an iconic sleeve when you're 16. Just cutting things up and sticking them back together again.
It's definitely it's all part of it. You know? It's all part of that journey.
It is all part of it. It is a journey, and it probably took me about 30 years to make a record I was actually really happy with, because I was doing it back to front, really. But in a way, the weird thing about us is our last two albums are our best albums, but nobody normally makes their best albums in the late 50s. Normally you've run out of ideas by now. But I finally worked out how to make the ideas actually work properly and sound good. It didn't make them massive massively successful records. They were slightly more successful underground cult records than they were 30 years ago. That's all they were. But they realised visions, whereas before I had the vision, but didn't have the means to realise the vision. Whereas now I have. Yeah.
And that's the thing is, like you never know where this adventure is going to take you. And sometimes, it takes a little bit to, as you said, to work out that sound that's in your head. It's not always a matter about knowing all the chords or knowing all the scales. It's simply just putting yourself out there. And sometimes it takes a little bit to find that sound, that tone. And I've years of making music now myself, and I'm still always hunting for that sound that's in my mind's eye. And if you're musicians, you know what I'm talking about. There's that thing that you're always trying to achieve, trying to build towards, and just try to get it out. And I'm always chasing that dragon. I'm my own worst critic. I'm like, I can always improve here and there, and but I wouldn't have it any other way. I love where this has taken me.
But Strong Feels Forever is, it's an amazing piece of music, mysterious, dark, sounds perfect. But John Lennon always hated the sound of it and always wanted to remix it. And if he hadn't been shot, he was going to remix it in '81. So, I mean, that's the only good thing I could think of about the fact he got shot. He didn't wreck one of the greatest sounding pieces of music of all time, which is accidentally sounds great because they had to stick two versions of it together. But the rough edit actually makes things sound even better because it makes it sound even more dislocated. It's like a happy accident, isn't it?
And that's sometimes like that happenstance, you're in the studio, you're recording, and you do something a little bit different, you have that magical moment of a creature or circumstance, and you just create something there in the moment, and then it becomes timeless, and some things you just can't replicate, as time and place. And sometimes it's just the synergy of everybody being together, and you come up with something completely brand new. And those moments are what make it all worthwhile. Those unexpected little triumphs and victories that just catch you as the writer off guard. You're like, did we really just do this? And it's that's the part that I love, because like I said, it's you're creating something, and then you're having all these minds come together to get involved to do it, and then it becomes its own thing, and at the end of the day, that's amazing.
Oh, completely amazing. And it's the moment when it works is a magical moment, and that's the bit that people don't understand. Why do bands keep doing this? Because you're always looking for that moment when the Doors are called communal mind, isn't it? When everybody's on the same page at the same time. And we extend it out to that moment of creation. We extend it out so the whole audience gets it as well. That's an amazing moment as well. When everyone's lost in that moment of magic, which you're creating, and you're right in the middle of this kind of hurricane. It's amazing, isn't it?
It really is. And especially like you've done the Membranes, for a while. You had a push. You, if I'm understanding, you broke up in the '90s for a bit and then got back together in 2010, about a decade ago.
Yeah. My buddy Valentine did a festival, and they got to pick the other bands to play the festival. And they asked us to reform and do it. We did it. People liked it. Then we decided we just didn't want to do the same stuff over and over. We'd have to. So we went and made a double album of brand new stuff instead. So we made another double album of brand new stuff just because we had the opportunity to do it at the time. We had so many ideas. And look, we didn't really have any hits, so we weren't stuck with having to play the hits because we didn't have any.
Oh man! So, and now you recently the track that we checked out for Breathe, that was an older song, if I'm understanding, that you remastered and then re-put out.
It was off the last album, and we just wanted to do a version of it that had loads of choir on it, just go really totally into the choir thing and strip everything else off it. So I got the choir in there just before the lockdown started. And then during the lockdown, we just kept mixing it to get the right version of it. So I just like the idea of it being as far away from being a complete noise thing that we were known for in the 80s as possible, but capturing the same atmosphere and ideas, but just doing the voices instead of guitars in a way. So it's kind of a wall of sound made of voices.
which which was amazing. When we heard, absolutely loved it. Was very blown away, and a very powerful song, and it's very poignant for the time right now. Um, to be sending those types of messages out to the world, because it is truly important, and that definitely caught my attention. You guys have always, when I'm going through like my list and things, or like I've grew up on the Buzzcocks and like Gang of Four and stuff like that, and you guys have always been right there next to him. So to sit and have this opportunity, it's amazing to me, because you guys have always been there. When I'm looking at the annex of punk rock through history, membranes have always come up, at least within my circles of things I'm looking towards. So this has been awesome to be able to sit and to get to know each other a little bit more.
I appreciate this. Yeah, I guess in all those northern post-punk bands, if you write out a list of the 100 bands around the time, we're about number 100. So we're kind of the weird little one that never kind of went over.
But you know how it is with punkers. We're archivist. We're constantly like, oh, we find out about this band, and then we need to find out about all the subsequent bands that are related to it, other bands that are on the label. Oh, this person started a label, who was on that label? And then it's all about hunting down those discographies, especially for me. I love that history and just going through, even if it is some fringe, obscure one album band, they were still a part of the movement, a part of the zeitgeist at the time.
It was about the foot soldiers. It was about the pig farmers, not the kings and queens. Of course, Joe's drummer was fantastic, but if he's not the whole story, the story is just as much about Punky in Hull in 1977, who risked his life going to town on the bus by having spiky hair. That's the story as valid as the story of the Clash, and that's what makes it a uniquely interesting movement, I think. I think all the stories are really important.
And you're right, because it's like they become like folklore, folk legend, if you will, because they become such an important facet of that community, and those lessons, those ideals, they resonate, especially if they're still active, and or the message is continuing forward, passing the torch on to the next generation, so that those stories just don't die. They go from being to a local story into a local legend.
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, it's all part of the fabric of it, isn't it? And worldwide as well. All those experiences are really important in the whole thing.
It really is. It really is. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you were a small facet in the history and put out one album, or if you were a major contributor, to the movement. It's still just as valid. Your voice was a part of it throughout it, or continued longevity throughout, much like yourself over the past 3, almost 4 decades, from the membranes to Gold Blade to your work as a journalist, which I'm kind of curious about that before we have to part ways. How did you get involved from, playing bass and doing vocals in the membranes to getting as active as you were socially?
Well, because it was getting this punk rock, it was about doing a fanzine. Somebody brought a copy of Stiff and Glue to school, and it looked like the sort of thing you could copy because it was photocopied. So we made our own fanzine, did that for 3 or 4 years, and started writing for Zigzag, which is a national distributor magazine in London. And then for Sounds, I never learned to be a journalist. It was just like, in British music writing is weird, isn't it? Because you don't actually have to be a trained writer to be a music writer. You just communicate your passion and interest in music. And that's what I mean. There's 2 types. There's some people have been to journalism in college, and the rest of the time, and that was 2 types of music journalism for years. Whereas now it's more like a career, isn't it, for the people who do it. And that's how I ended up doing that. And then I started doing my own website, and then you just start doing other media stuff as well. Because all you're doing is explaining your love of a culture, because you're immersed in the culture, aren't you? So, yeah, talk about it, write about it, or create music in it. To me, it's never seemed like separate disciplines. They all seem like the same thing.
I couldn't agree more, honestly, because we sit there, and those of us that are passionate about those different facets in our life, we do that anyways. We try to get people involved. We try to get them motivated and inspired because we're so moved by the power of the music and the movement. So you're sitting there, you're trying to give an unbiased. You're like, even though you're loving it with all your heart, but like, you have to check this out. You've got to do a deep dive on this album. You got to check out this book. You got to check out this film. You got to check out this magazine. You know, we get so charged up about things, but you're right. You're just doing the things that you love and just doing it a little bit more, or, you know, like, oh shit, well, look at what they're doing. Well, I can do that because I'm doing that already. You know, it's already a part of what I do every single day of my life, which is why, like, you know, I went to film school myself and stuff like that, and one of many Americans that are horribly crippled by college debt, but that's a whole other situation. But I realized, like, I didn't need the big degree and all that to do what I love, because I've been doing this ever since. I've been going to shows, having these conversations, making these interactions, and just sharing our lives together and getting to know one another, you know? And I think that's incredibly important, you know, which makes sense for, you know, individual like you just putting yourself out there. And especially with the perspectives that you have, like, this has been amazing, this back and forth. Usually, you know, it takes years to kind of build up this rapport of an individual, but I meet so many amazing people from around the world, and guard is just dropped, and I feel like I'm catching up with an old friend, you know, so it's exciting to me.
I guess it's family, though, in a weird way, and it's an odd, weird, dysfunctional family.
And we wear that on our sleeve here. I say that we're just a big group of fringe misfits. We're dysfunctional, but what is any family? You know, and sometimes it's the family you choose, sometimes it's the family you're given, but you're working with what you got and just putting the pieces together the best you can.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
One thing that I gotta ask, and I know that my viewers are gonna dig this, because if I don't mention this, I think some of them are going to give me a kick in the ass on this. Now, while doing my homework, as I occasionally do, I occasionally get my homework done, I was noticed one little line of information that completely caught my attention, and is that you were the very first one to interview Nirvana back in 1988. Now, everybody here in the States, that was such a formative band, and it was for me too. You know, I've had my moments of weighing due to personal events in my life, just the actions of Kurt Cobain. Suicide is a very difficult subject to talk about. And when somebody passes away, it leaves a bunch of conflicted emotions. You know, I've had, unfortunately, some close friends choose that route, and it's heart-wrenching. So I try, you know, some people talk so much about the death, and it's the same thing with Jesus Christ. Like, why are you so focused on death for? Why don't you talk about the life and celebration of the individual? Now, here's an individual that, same deal, wasn't massively musically super skilled, but the message, the time and place, the happenstance of it all encapsulated an entire generation, multiple generations. It's still such a formative part of everybody's adolescence, of going through that teen angst and rebellion. Everybody here in the States that is into that, they fully embrace Nirvana. And it's been such a massive part of our culture here. And you were the very first individual to interview the band. And I think that's mind-blowing. So I got to hear that story.
I didn't even know I was till they did a book of interviews, and they did them in chronological order. I said, how come mine's first? And they said, because yours was the first. And I thought, I knew I was one of the first. I thought I was the first person in the UK to interview them. But this person who compiled this book said, you were the first in the world. And I mean, they were looked on as being initially Sub Pop kind of fucked up by signing this band up. You know, this is like the runs to the litter. But I remember getting, before the single came out, I was sent a copy of the single a couple of months before, or a demo, or I can't remember what it was now. And I thought, wow, his voice is amazing. I was totally captivated by his voice. So I set up an interview, phoned him up at his mum's house. I still got the phone number actually in my address book somewhere. I just did a new band interview. It's just like, you know, where are you from? You know, why are you doing this? And who are you? Kind of interviews. And then 6 months later, we went out to New York to interview them when they're doing their first headline tour. So I saw them play that show at Maxwell's Hoboken when they were a 4-piece band. And they trashed all the gear at the end of the set. There's about 15 people at the gig. And we stayed with them for 3 days in Lower East Side, and the flat was them and Tad and us, like 20 of us sleeping in this tiny little flat, all virtually on top of each other. So we got to know them really well. And my photographer got run over by a bus and broke his leg. And because they're doing this piece for Sounds, and they're running out getting cheese sandwiches so we could get the plane back home again. and I found the cassette of the interview, so I put it online, and it's weird because you listen to old interviews and you go right back in the room at that point of time again, so that's quite spooky. But they're also talking about this new song they've written, which I can't work out if it's Teen Spirit or not, but the way they describe it, it could well be Teen Spirit. And I didn't realise they'd had it that early, but see, the thing about Nirvana was that it happened really quickly. So for about a year and a half, they're like a little cult band playing to 40 people everywhere. They get signed to major, then they do Nevermind, and then about 3 months later, they're the biggest band in the world. It just went that quick, didn't it? I remember when Nevermind, the album came out, and the label pressed 3,000 copies in England, thinking it was just going to be some weird cult band, and it went in and out the charts, and they had to really go fast to press thousands of copies of the record to keep up with the buzz of the record, and they just went through the roof, So I don't think that ever does anybody any good. But the problems he already had. I think he came from a family with a long tradition. His uncles had committed suicide and things, weren't they? So there was nowhere to fall back on them days. You didn't get looked after, did you? And I think maybe now, maybe slightly better, but still not good enough and things. But I think the drugs didn't help either. Self-medicated never helps, does it? And there's so many what-if suicides behind it. It was suddenly gone round half an hour before. I mean, we toured with Mark Lanigan last year. Mark was telling us about he'd actually gone round to the house the day that Kurt shot himself because they were friends with each other, and he'd been knocking on the door and everything, and then he just left again. And he said he's got some what ifs to go around his head as well. So it's a super tragic story, isn't it?
It really is, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like here it's the American dream, but it became the American nightmare, because here's this thing, small town band out of the middle of nowhere, Washington, jumps on a mini label in Seattle on Sub Pop, and like you said, a year and a half later, they're the biggest thing in the world, and all that type of pressure, and nobody talks about that end of this, like all the overwhelming influences of stardom, being in the spotlight, the social expectation of it all, and that type of weight, especially when you have pre-existing issues beforehand, so not to, like I said, not to put too much focus on the death, because it seems to be the big thing that we talk about when it comes to Kurt, and this, but one thing I was curious was just like, how is that interaction, spending time together in the early days? Because it seemed to me there was a cheerful optimism while also a beautiful sadness in him.
Yeah, I mean, he's very intense. He's an intense guy. He's quite quiet. Remember, he never changed his clothes in 3 days. He slept in his clothes, curled up in a ball. The interview is great. He's very open. Chris Nosovelic was friendly. The one who's really friendly is Jason Everman, the one who left. Who bizarrely, he's a bit of a hippie kind of dude. Ended up being in the American Marines in Afghanistan, didn't he, for 10 years? Yep. I thought, wow, I could never imagine him doing that. But he hung out with us. I was hanging out with him for days. We went to gigs together. We walked streets in New York. It's the first time he'd been in New York and that. So we Kurt and the rest of them. We've seen them at the gig and back at the flat, and we sat on the steps for a few days on the flat as well. Just look at New York going past. So we got to know him quite well as well as you get to know somebody in 3 days flat and stuff. But I couldn't profess to know him inside out. But I would know him as somebody you hung out with a little bit. I mean, I'm sure there was some drugs going on then, but at the time didn't realise that, because those kind of bands and that scene, the those are old school drugs. We didn't think people took heroin then. That's what old rockers did. I think he's probably self-medicating in some way then. That's probably why he's killed up a little ball all the time, So it's hard to tell really, But the gig was amazing. I mean, I watched the sound check and the gig. And they really did detonate. It was one of the best gigs I've ever been to.
And that's the thing.
I saw the guitar from that gig. He trashed his guitar and it got sold for $30,000. He gave it to the woman whose flat it was, and was staying with Janet Billy. I still know to this day, actually, Janet. And she auctioned it out for 30 grand. And I was thinking, oh, wow, I wish I got that guitar.
And that's the thing, is like you never know. It's not like you're in a situation you're like, this band's gonna be the biggest fucking band in the world. You don't know that. You're just there,
No
kind
idea.
of a passenger along for the ride.
They were the support. They were supporting Tad, who were a great bands, but they were the support band that night. So we're just writing about them because it sounds that's the kind of bands that our readers like. They're interested in them. They're very, whatever you just say is, God, Nirvana, this is a really good band. You know, they could be as big as Sonic Youth. That was always a catchphrase. Any alternative band that played guitars, if you get it right, you could be as big as Sonic Youth. That was the ceiling. I mean, there's no way would you get the top 100. And then, you know, within a year, they were number one album in America. It sold 15 million copies and just changed music. You know, bands like Green Day, all those other bands came in on the back of it, selling multi-million copies. It was completely unimaginable a band like that could sell that many records before, wasn't it?
And it really was. You know, it absolutely really was the thing. And especially like, because that time in music, it changed so many things, you know. When the grunge movement came in, you got bands like Mudhoney and Husker Du, more a little bit lesser known, but still viable killer bands. You had Dinosaur Jr. and Gumball, and of course you mentioned it, the ceiling being topped with Sonic Youth. And I gotta say, the ceiling is still topped with Sonic Youth. You know, I think there are tons of artists out there that are just like, is this as good? No, but we're getting there, you know, because it is the ceiling, because they achieved a level that not many can aspire to. What they did.
It was a freak moment, wasn't it? It was a freak moment when everything lined up right and somebody really good got through. It happens occasionally, but it's not. It's for years and years. Everyone's just kind of culty, and every now and then the fabric gets ripped and everyone just charges through. That's what punk was in a sense, wasn't it? There's an opportunity that people can actually get the good stuff through to the mainstream, and I'm up for that. I think people should always get the good stuff in the mainstream. Never underestimate the public's taste. The public will always listen to all this music if they ever got the opportunity to hear it. That's all that happened with Nirvana. When they had a song that could get on the radio, and suddenly the whole thing opened up for everybody.
And I really like that. Every once in a while, the fabric breaks, and then you get a Sonic Youth. You know, you get a Nirvana. Sometimes the normal confines of everyday life, those normalities are broken, and it allows for something that should be absolute fringe and just on the cuff of things becomes one of the biggest, you know, most influential acts of a generation.
Exciting, isn't it? I mean, it must, you know, if I was 20 years older, we'd probably talk about the Beatles like this. We'd say, well, I saw them play to 20 people for this gig in the south of England, and 3 weeks later, they're the biggest band in the world. You know what I mean? Sometimes it can take years, and sometimes when it gets through, it just goes really quick. Suddenly everybody's on it because it was too good to hide any longer, wasn't it?
And it comes back to that thing where it becomes bigger than itself and everybody just wants to share it, you know, and it becomes this communal hive mind with it. And like I said, when you end up creating something bigger than life, excuse me, and it becomes legendary, you know, where it continues generations, it still echoes throughout. Seems to be a reoccurring theme throughout our conversation where, you know, some things just keep echoing throughout history. You know, maybe it's that we're meant to hold on to that ideology and some of those proper ideals because it truly it puts on display some of the greatest innovations in the human mind, you know, and just that spiritness, you know, that vigilance, that drive, that ambition, the best parts of humanity, I think is often showcased through punk rock because of just the raw intensity and the honesty that comes along with it. And like you said, every once in a while you tear through the fabric. I really like that, man.
Yeah.
Now I gotta ask before we part ways here. So you guys been doing some work recently. You got a new book out as well. What's new with the Membranes and yourself?
I've got 2 books. I've got 1 book coming out in November, which is I've written a book with the guy who runs the biggest green energy company in Britain. It's the story of his life. He's got an interesting life. And the next book out is a history of goth music and post-punk, dark side of post-punk music, which comes out some point next year, depending on when the book company gets out of furlough. So it's all, because these times everything's really bouncy, you never quite know what's going to happen next. With the membranes, well, we're just like every band, we're just waiting to see when things can start again. So it kind of sort of started here, now it's sort of sliding back into lockdown again. So we don't quite know again. So it's probably going to be about another year until we can start doing stuff.
Just, that's kind of pretty much like everybody, just kind of taking it day by day. It's the best that we can do right now.
Yeah.
And, just try to stay optimistic and take care of one another out there and make sure we're all, mentally and physically and emotionally doing well, the trifecta.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's back to basics. It's probably a good thing, isn't it? Because it makes you realise everything else is kind of a luxury, really, isn't it? The things that really matter are the things you take for granted, isn't it?
You're absolutely right, because I think with everything, it truly showed to some people what is important. What do they hold on to? What are those things that are near and dear to them right now? Those are the things that are getting people through this mental shift, and it's, of course it's been difficult. The isolationism, the quarantine's been hard on everybody in so many different ways, but we absolutely can do it if we persevere together, and just checks and balances, making sure that your neighbors are good, checking in on family, making sure that you're good, being honest with yourself. These are all, all part of it, and unfortunately we're about to come to winter now. And I think we're going to see some spikes and things, and hopefully with the right attitude and the right mindset, we can all make it out of this, hopefully a little bit more educated, a little bit more self-aware, a little bit more socially aware of the things that are happening around us and get involved. I'm very excited to check out the book in the fall, because sustainable energy has been something that been a big focus on in my family. My dad grew up in a solar and wind powered house, and then I grew up building a hydrogen fuel cell with him. I built GEAT reactors with him. I'm so fortunate I have a stepdad and a dad that are both engineers in their own different ways. So
you'll love this book.
In those types of environments.
It's called Manifesto.
The focus on
it's a manifesto. It's a manifesto for a green future, post-pandemic green future. And the guy did it. He built his own windmills, got loads of windmills over Britain now. He's never been to college. He just no ideas beyond him. So he's got really interesting projects and ideas, and it's about how we can make the changes that we have to make, that people think you can make in 30 years' time. We're going to have to make them next year. This is how we can do it without making our lives any more difficult, actually. So it's about green populism and how to make the world greener without changing the stuff that we do in it too much, So it's interesting. So I'll send you a PDF of it as soon as I get one.
Oh, that would be great, because that's been a huge part. Like where I live, I'm fortunate where I have the property. I have a garden in my front yard. I got a garden in my backyard. I do have a lawn. This is America, but in other countries, the big lawn is actually a big, massive garden. It's an edible property. You had land that was passed down, and you have orchards, and you have different bits of food, and you have vineyards with with olives and grapes and all these amazing things, where Americans have big, giant, massive, empty yards which are not being properly utilized. So I've always kind of leaned towards that European sense, that I'd like to be able to have an edible front yard, walk through and eat bits of fruit and eat bits of vegetables. And and honestly, I've noticed even my own mental health drastically skyrocket with having a garden to care and tend for, because in turn you're caring and tending to yourself. So there's a lot of benefits to taking those types of Go Green initiative, and that you're producing non-GMO organic food that's produced yourself. You get a satisfaction of feeding yourself and your family, but also by minimizing the carbon footprint around you. So there are things that I'm drastically involved in that I am so excited to check out the book. And that's Manifesto?
Yeah, I'll send you a PDF. I think I'll get it next week, so I'll forward it to you.
Oh, that'd be great. Now, before we part ways, any final thoughts or words of wisdom to our audience?
No.
No, I think we've covered a lot of bases today.
Yeah, we covered a couple of things there, didn't we? Yeah.
But this has been
Yeah.
great. I honestly, John, I can't thank you enough for being part of the show and coming to hang out with us. This has been great. Where can we find you guys online if people want to check out the Membranes?
On Facebook, Membranes, or come and find me on Instagram, JOHNROBB77. That's it. That's a good start. Yeah.
Perfect. Well,
Yeah.
my guest tonight has been John Robb of the Membranes. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight. And don't be a stranger. Seriously. Our home is your home.
Let's
So
keep in
come and
touch.
hang out whenever you
Yeah.
like.
Okay, Ace. Thanks a lot.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much.